Hi everybody, in today's video, this is part 2 of my watercolors. I did a video earlier on watercolor markers and I will link that below. In today's video, I'm going to compare the Gansai Tambi watercolor palette. And this is the 24 pack and Peerless watercolors, which is the bonus pack. And what I've done with mine is I've attached them to a little index card. I don't have the color listed, but I kind of swatched out the color so I know what color it is. So what I'm going to do here is just get my colors out. And I have a piece of Strathmore regular plain old watercolor paper and then Bristol smooth paper. The video I did earlier, the markers did much better on the Bristol Smooth, but I think the watercolors paints are going to do better on the watercolor paper. So I'm going to start off by, I think for this one, by wetting the paper first. So I have my water brush here, and I'm just going to wet an area here. Make it nice and juicy. Okay, and I'm going to start off with some of this bright red in the corner here. Now the Gansai Tambi I like because they're a much creamier consistency. So I think that gives you a little more control. But you can see that it spreads no problem on the wet watercolor paper. And I have not squeezed any water out of my brush. I'm going to go down here to the dry area. And you have more control of the paint in the dry area. It's not moving at all. And I just have a paper towel off on the side here that I'm going to use to clean my brush off. Okay. Alright, so for the Peerless, same thing. I'm going to wet this area up here. And then I have my color here. Same thing, moves no problem on the watercolor paper in the wet area. And you have much more control in the dry area. Now I will say this, the Peerless watercolors are more translucent. They're more like a traditional watercolor. If you like this look up here where the ink's pigment spreads out, the Peerless is definitely much more translucent when it comes to that, where the Gansai Tambi, definitely a thicker paint. Alright, so you can see here, they both performed very similarly. They spread equally in the wet on wet areas, and you had a lot of control in the dry areas. So I think it's just a preference of how do you like your paint consistency. This is paint that's dyed onto a sample, which goes a long way. It's highly concentrated. Or do you want your paint in palettes and in pans? There's a lot of watercolor companies out there that come in a tube and you put it out into these little pans and then it dries this way and then you reconstitute it with some water. And it's very easy to do. Just take a sprayer or some water, a traditional water and brush, and do that, or you can spray these and then let it reconstitute. And I'm sure you could water it down a lot more to get less of that creamy consistency, but I like the creamy consistency, but it's personal preference on what you like to paint with. Okay, let's try it on the Bristol paper now. I got much different results with the markers once I switched paper, so let's see what they do here. All right, so I'm just going to wet this top area again. And we'll go in with this bright blue color. So the same results on the Bristol paper, although the Bristol paper does seem to be drying very quickly. This is drying very quickly up here. There's not a lot of play time here. That's already dry there. The watercolor paper, if you like that wet on wet look and you want the watercolors to bloom, you're going to have a better time doing that on the watercolor paper because the moistness stays in the watercolor paper longer, so you have more time to play with that. Okay, same thing, going to wet the paper over here. Again, the Peerless is a little more transparent, so you're going in for the pigment a little more. Reloading the brush. But flows very smoothly on that paper. And again, you have a lot of control with it in the dry paper as well. But again, not a lot of pigment in that Peerless, so you have to go back in and reload your brush if you want to maintain that pigment. There you go. And the last thing I want to do is kind of go back and reactivate this. So I'm just going to take my water brush and get it a little wet. And I'm going to move some of this color, or see if it'll move. So here it is on the dry. And it is moving. Up here on the wet, it's sort of moving. It's like once it's in there, it really doesn't want to move. I mean, it is pulling some of that color up, but it's staying where it's at. Which means your brush strokes would show more once your item is colored or down. Okay, now see, it's the opposite result with the Gansai Tambi. On the dry, it moved. You mean it's almost clearly gone there. On the wet, it's still there. I mean, it's soaked into the paper at that point, so I can understand that. But there you go. If you are looking to put your color down and then reactivate it later, you're going to have a better shot with the Gansai than you are the Peerless. If you want more control and more permanency in your watercolor, then I would say go with the Peerless. And let's try that on the watercolor paper and see if it moves. Same thing on the dry. Clean off my brush. Same results on the watercolor paper. Yeah, so it doesn't matter which paper you use, you're going to have the same results. The Gansai does reactivate with the water and move, where the Peerless kind of stays there, more permanent. Now the Peerless is a little more translucent in color, where the Gansai is more pigmented. And it doesn't matter if you're using watercolor paper or Bristol Smooth, you're going to have the same results. Now the Bristol Smooth is warping, so if you want something that's not going to warp, I would advise taping this down or using a heat tool. This paper does tend to pill when there's too much water on it, so I would say if you're going to be doing traditional watercoloring, go with a watercolor paper. and go with watercolor paints. If you are going to be coloring in stamped images, go with Bristol smooth paper and go with the markers. So it just depends on what you're going to be doing with your medium on what's going to be best for you. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. It was an experiment for me, so now I know how to use my products. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. I appreciate everyone watching, and keep on stamping.